Thank you so much for joining us today for our Part 2 More Myth Busting with MRFs webinar. Today we're focusing on lucky number 7. So we appreciate your time today. We have a full action-packed agenda, so we will get started. Just a few technical details before we dive into the heart of the subject. You can join us and listen through your computer or through your audio line. The audio tab allows you to choose either. You'll find that on the right-hand side. Lines are automatically muted due to the size of this webinar, but questions are encouraged. So we ask that participants please type in their question using the question and answer feature. Please do this in real time as questions come up as we're speaking. Add those questions in. I'll be pausing for a quick moment after each one of the myths that we address so that I can quickly scan the questions that come in, and we'll be taking one or two of those questions before we move on to the next myth. So I encourage you to add your questions in real time, not hold them until the end. So just to recap our antitrust rules, as a 501c3 nonprofit, Curbside Value Partnership is subject to these antitrust rules, and we're committed not to discuss any prices or other factors affecting prices during this webinar. So we've got an outstanding group of speakers for you today. We're very excited and appreciative of their time. These are the familiar faces that you remember from our webinar last time. We have Mike Pope. He's Director of Procurement for Sunoco Recycling. We have Ben Pedigo. He's Corporate Recycling Sales Coordinator for Rumpke. We have Phil Brazee, and he is the Recycling Coordinator, or Recycling Director, excuse me, for the City of Philadelphia. And then myself, Karen Bandhauer, and our Executive Director, Keith Harrison, with Curbside Value Partnership. So again, this is Karen Bandhauer. I had a question to restate who I am and my affiliation. Just come in. Karen Bandhauer, Project Director with Curbside Value Partnership. Just to kind of reframe things a little bit, for those of you who were on the webinar last time, you would remember this slide. Just to kind of give a little bit of structure again, today we're going to be discussing the intersection of quality and value of recyclables. And we're taking this on Mythbuster style, so very similar to what we did the last time. It's going to be a really active conversational webinar. And again, when thinking about value of recyclables, we need to think in terms of the value when sold in their specified bales, and that's really determined by quality. And this quality is related to two factors. Did the right thing go into the bin or the cart, and were those things prepared properly so that they themselves aren't contaminated, or that they don't contaminate anything else when moving through a commingled stream. So in the coming year, CVP will develop resources to really dig into this problem of contamination, and this Part 2 webinar is exactly part of that. We had such a great turnout on the last webinar, and we had so many good questions that we weren't able to address that we decided it would be very fun to do a Part 2. So we'll be busting those top 7 myths, and these 7 were selected based on the questions that came in. So just as a recap, our original 12 big myths you can see here on the screen. I won't go through all of these, but these were the 7. These were the top ones that came through based on feedback both during the webinar and then after the webinar. And what we're going to do right now, just to make things a little bit more fun, is we're going to do a poll. And you'll see that pop up in a second. See, you should see that poll. Go ahead and select which is your top myth of these that are highlighted here. The various categories. You know, are you curious about cartons? Are you curious about fiber and pizza boxes? Are you curious about glass, metals, plastic? We'll go ahead and let folks vote here. And what we'll do is we'll spend a little bit extra time on those top 2 or 3 myths. I'll just give a few more seconds. Okay, I think we're seeing some consistent results here. It looks like plastic, fiber, and pizza boxes, with a close follow-on by cartons and glass. They're kind of neck and neck. So we'll make note of that. But for sure, we'll be spending a good amount of time on plastic, and we'll be spending a good amount of time on fiber and pizza boxes as well. Okay, so let's jump right in. Let's start with metals. So this is the question from last time. Yes or no, metal's a metal. If cans can go in, so can the pans. And Ben, would you like to recap from our last conversation?
Yes, Karen, good to be on this webinar. Bulky items, Karen, with new sophisticated MRF equipment, we're running 30, 40, 50 tons an hour. Bulky metals, stringy items like chains, strings of lights can cause major problems in a MRF. So, focus on, post-consumer steel cans, those types of things that can go through that system and be recovered.
Okay. Thank you. And then our top audience questions that came in after, we had a question starting with motor oil filters. So what should I do with my drained motor oil filters? Phil? Let's see, Phil, you might be on mute.
Karen, just this is Ben, just to kind of come in there on that. I think Phil had talked about looking at oil change centers, those types of establishments as an alternative.
Yeah, and this is Keith. I'll weigh in there that this is where we want to have a conversation with your MRF. Typically, the those motor oil filters are a no list, and that's because there's still oil left in them. So the goal is to go for those household, inside the house household metals, not the bulky metals that we see in these pictures here. And the goal, number one goal, is to make sure that your MRF is successful. You need a healthy MRF that's putting a lot of good material through and, in order for them to provide a good service back to your community. So this is the first of time that I'll say this, and I'll say it several times during today's conversation, but let's have a conversation. Make sure you're having a conversation with your MRFs to really get down to the yes and no's. But as you design your communications, stick with the household metals and help your residents think about the things inside their house that way.
That's great. Thank you, Keith. We did have a question pop up on this issue. Can you readdress the pan issue versus chains and lights?
And Karen, this has been Pettigo here. I think we look, and you've got some good photos of MRFs with screen systems, those types of things. A bulky metal can really wreak havoc on some of the new recycling MRFs. And so that's why our concern is to stay with post-consumer cans, those types of things. In all areas, bulky metals could go to scrap yards. There are a lot of good alternatives there.
And I think as far as chains, long stringy things always wreak havoc on, as Ben was saying, on the equipment. So so that's the trouble. I wondered if Phil was able to come back, though. Phil, is your line working again? Okay.
Well, we'll keep trying for Phil. Let us know if you're able to reconnect, Phil. But in the meantime, just a couple more quick questions. I wanted to address a question regarding which companies are speaking on behalf of the MRFs. We have Ben Pettigo representing Rumpke. We have Mike Pope representing Sunoco. There was another question, actually two more questions related to metals. Aluminum foil containers cleaned of food residue, of course. This is from Lynn Dyer. Keith, would you like to take that one?
Yes. Hey, Lynn. The answer is, here we go. Make sure you talk to your MRF. For the most part, we're seeing an expanded recovery of aluminum containers, but not all across the board. So talk to your MRF.
Okay. And then Rich asked about metal screw cap lids. My understanding is those are going to be too small dimensionally to really make it through a MRF. Is that correct?
Yeah, size matters, and so we're going for pieces that won't fall through that first star screen. When it comes to lids, generally we're going to say keep your lids on the container for their best chance of making it through, but we're going to get into that when we talk about glass in just a little bit.
Okay, and then just a comment from the City of Madison, Wisconsin. George there offered that When the city collects oil filters at their oil collection sites, their waste oil vendor removes them for recycling. So, again, finding a recycling home just outside of the MRF infrastructure. So I will move us right along to glass. Glass is glass. If jars can go in, so can drinking glasses, window panes, my Pyrex baking dish. Mike?
Yes, so similar to our last conversation, there are many different types of glass. You can get ceramics if you're getting into the kitchen, which are a real contamination for those that are trying to use the glass at the end of the day. So you really, again, as always, need to talk with your MRF operator to find out what system they've got set up and what markets are available in that area. But it really is driven by what is the opportunity to use the material as it goes through the MRF, and making sure that you're getting as clean a stream coming out of the MRF that can then be used by whatever industry is available in the area.
Great, thank you. And so our top questions that came in is, if glass is recyclable, why isn't it included in some programs? Mike, would you like to continue on with that one?
Yes, glass is certainly recyclable. If you look at the composition of the single stream that comes in, it can be as much as 30% in some markets. So it's a great opportunity from a diversion standpoint from the landfill. Unfortunately, from an operating standpoint, once that glass gets into your process and it breaks, it's like literally running sandpaper through the equipment. So it does have a high maintenance factor in the operations of the MRF, and then it does have some of the lower value of the commodities once it comes out of there. A lot of that depends on how clean it is and how well you can keep it free from other contaminants for glass processors to be able to use it after the fact. But quite often glass is kept out of the system. I shouldn't say quite often, but when it is kept out of the system, it has to do with either the end market or the ability to process the glass. As the bottles and jars and everything break, those little pieces of glass can be also contaminated into either the plastics or the fiber. And I can tell you, as a paper company, Sunoco, that's one of the biggest issues we have, is being able to clean items like glass and sand and grit out of the recyclable material that comes in. So the more that you can keep it out, the better the quality is of the other materials. But it really comes down, as I said at the beginning, to the MRF operator and the markets that are available in your area.
Okay. And then, Ben, relating to question number 2, what about broken glass being a safety issue?
Well, Karen, I think what we see now in the newer MRFs, to Mike's point, a lot of the screening for glass is done up front to alleviate the issues of glass moving through the system. So I think what we're seeing with the new MRF configurations, get glass out as quickly as possible. You know, Karen, broken glass is part of the single stream process, and you know, this mixed broken cullet is a you know, relatively well, specific to single stream recycling facilities. I think you know, where MRFs want to be is you know, more quality control, more mechanization, you know, less you know, hand sorting, those types of things. So you know, don't give up on glass if you're in an area that having some problems finding an end user. It's a very important component in curbside drop-off recycling.
And then lids on glass jars. We've actually had a couple of questions get typed in specific to that as well. Keith, do you want to talk a little bit about lids on or off?
So when it comes to plastic, the message is lids, keep your caps on. And CVP is focused on helping communities have solid education with their communities, or with their residents. So what we would like to be able to say is caps and lids on all bottles and jars. That would get towards the simplest message, but we're not quite there yet. Earlier today I was talking with Bill Clark from Reflective Glass. They're a beneficiation company, so they take that glass from MRFs that's all mixed up. They further break it, and then they color separate it. So they take it from a 3-mix to a single color. And we were talking about this topic, and he says from his point of view, the answer is yes. We can take those lids on the jars just fine and still recycle those metal containers, those metal lids at the end. But when you step back to the MRF perspective, it's a little bit all over the board still. So Ben and Mike and I were discussing it earlier. I've been having this conversation with Waste Management too, and put in a call earlier today to ReCommunity. So really trying to get a consistent message across the board. So for right now, I'd talk to your MRF about it. But in the coming future, CVP hopes to help you with some consistent messaging around that.
So, and something I wanted to follow up with, Keith, because we're saying talk to your MRF a lot, and the reason why we're saying that is really because local program success is strongly dependent on MRF success, and we all need to be successful along the value chain. But there was a question related to, is there any efforts happening to kind of coordinate what's accepted regionally or statewide around MRFs, and then related to that saying, the average homeowner or citizen participating in a recycling program isn't going to be contacting their MRFs. And so to be clear, when we say contact your MRF, we're really speaking about units of government that are managing solid waste programs. So if you have a recycling program that you're managing and you're developing outreach materials, we strongly encourage you to talk to your MRF, find out what their big problem areas are. And when you have questions like this, when you're developing your materials, to have good communications with them to make sure that everybody's kind of saying the same thing along the line. Anything to add to that, Keith?
Yeah, very true. I'm not trying to pass the buck here. I'm trying to say that if we're going to tackle good quality and contamination, there has to be a strong relationship between the community and the MRF. And so to the extent that we can answer uniform questions, yes, caps should be on plastic bottles, things like that, we will. For the ones that are still in the works, you might still have a unique solution. But to the question is there anything being done to develop more consistency of materials? You bet. We are definitely working on that through our technical council, through our work with the cities. And the goal is to try and develop more confidence around the new common suite of materials. Back in the day, it was pretty much bottles and cans could go in, boxes and paper could go in the bin. But what's the new norm? How do we create some consistency so that when people move from home to work to play, they can put the same things in each bin? That would go a long way. So we are working towards a better solution there.
Okay. And then one final question before we move on to glass. Do any states have glass-only bottle bills? I believe the answer is no. Does anyone else know any difference?
I believe the answer is no.
Okay. Thank you very much. All right, so let's move right along then, now that we're kind of getting into this CAPS message, and where folks had the most questions from the poll results, so I think we'll spend a fair amount of time here, is plastics. And we started this with the overarching myth last time. Plastic is plastic. If it's plastic and it has the little arrows with the little number inside, I can put it in my bin, right?
If only. Now, what I said last time is, remember that those little numbers and arrows on the bottom of a container were not put there to be an educational material. And as Stephanie from KW Plastics, the largest high-density polyethylene and polypropylene recycler, says, those arrows tell you about the plastic's past, not the plastic's future. So you really need to think about the material that you have in front of you and what's your message to the public. Generally, an all bottles or an all plastic containers message works very well. And we're working very hard to help communities explore end markets and trust the ability to accept tubs and lids. That's polypropylene and high-density polyethylene, but yogurt tubs and margarine tubs and their lids. Bulky rigids, so those are things like buckets or play equipment and things like that, as they have the space and the ability to go. What remains tricky, though, are things like film. Film means plastic wrap or bags. Those long, light things fly around, but also get stuck in MRF equipment and make sometimes so much that the entire MRF has to stop and people have to physically remove it. So what we have been doing is working with good partner programs like WRAP. WRAP is a non-MRF alternative for recovering more plastic bags and film. And for the meantime, at least, looking at how to increase plastics recovery in a way that doesn't also challenge the MRF.
Okay. So we will move on to the next question, and just a comment here from Susan Robinson with Waste Management that their MRFs have to stop 2 to 3 times a day to remove film. So very definitely a major issue. And we'll talk about that a little bit more on this question, next set of questions, but these were the 2 that came in, or the first 2 that came in. Why plastic bottles but not PET clamshells? Keith?
Yeah, well, that's a changing one. I think this is an example of what you knew yesterday about recycling might not be the same thing as what you should know tomorrow. There are communities that do accept those PET clamshells for recycling, and those PET clamshells increasingly can go in the same bale with the PET bottles. But let's think first about just the physics of the physical movement of that PET clamshell. So a clamshell, think of a clear salad takeout box or a sandwich takeout box. It's very light, and sometimes it just doesn't physically stay on the conveyor. So there's a physical problem of making sure that light material makes it through the equipment as it should. But there are good groups like Food Service Packaging Institute and NAPCOR, the PET group, that are working to get a solid answer, a consistent answer around can PET clamshells be in with the PET bottles. And as soon as we get to that, that will be part of that consistent messaging that we'll make sure gets out to all of you.
Okay. And then second question related to the plastic bags is this idea of a bag-in-bag or the bag balloon. Some MRFs are doing this at this point. Ben, Mike, as MRF representatives, what are your thoughts here?
Well, Karen, this is Ben Pettigo. You got a great visual there of bags getting really caught around screen systems, and so yeah, we 2-3 times a day are shutting down to get those bags out of the system. I think there are some good take-back programs. I know locally here, Kroger, some of the large grocery chains are doing a take-back program within their facilities.
And I would say that in talking to APR, the Association of Post-Consumer Plastics Recyclers, and some other groups, there is work going on to see if the bags of bags idea does work. And there are a couple MRFs across the country that do that, but there's that's a research project, I think, that's underway.
And this is Mike. Clearly the bags, for the most part of what you're putting in there, are recyclable. So as Ben said, if there's another outlet or process to get it back in, then that is good material and can be used. In this scenario, you have to have then somebody at the front of the line that's able to remove that material, because we don't have an automated way really to handle bags of bags today. But then the other challenge you get into as an operator is you're not sure what's inside that bag when it comes across the line. And it could be a bag of shredded paper. Who knows? It could be a bag of garbage that got thrown into the recycling bin by accident. So it enters into some other challenges there. We are continuing to work on different ways to handle the material, but I think as Susan from Waste Management commented, and Ben and ourselves as well, it's the impact it has on the process that's our biggest concern from the operator standpoint. Not that the material itself isn't any good, but just how to efficiently handle it, and that will continue to develop over time.
Right. That's an important point there, Mike, that there are good solid markets for this material when it's clean and dry, and so looking for those outlets at grocery stores and places like that is a good practice. A couple comments and related to bags that I wanted to add in here. Sago Jackson in the Pacific Northwest says, bags of bags get torn in transportation and by feeding in the MRF, and so they found that this is something that doesn't necessarily translate well into practice. And Susan Robinson with Waste Management also offers that they find that many times the bag-in-bag instructions aren't followed by the public, and so you just end up with higher volumes of loose bags, which creates the problems that we're seeing on the screen. And then one question that did come up related to commercial facilities, and Mike and Ben, you might have some thoughts on this, but they said a common practice for large commercial facilities is to use clear liners for recycling bins, and the liner and commingled recyclables go into a 4- or 6-yard dumpster. Are clear liners okay in this use?
Karen, Ben Pettigo here. I think the issue is when you look at the operations of MRFs, you're looking at 25, 35, 45 tons per hour of materials that go through. To Mike's point, it's very difficult. It's an operations issue to be able to handle bags. Our message is to look at alternative ways to recycle bags through a grocery store chain, that type of a program.
And this is Mike from Sunoco. There are some commercial applications like was being described there where it's mostly cardboard, for example, that comes in, but we tell our customers in those scenarios that you can put bottles, cans, etc. into a bag, and we will manually pull that out before we process the cardboard. But when it comes to residential material, for all the reasons many of us have said that we do stay away from that from a residential standpoint, just because of the process used to process it in the MRF.
Okay, thank you. And just to clarify, I've been mentioning Susan Robinson with Waste Management a few times. Those questions have actually been coming from Candy Castellanos, and she is the Senior Manager of Outreach and Education for the Pacific Northwest of Waste Management. So I think the machine was just auto-recognizing Susan on the account, so apologize for that. Okay, so I think that handles our bags questions. We've got lots of caps and cups and flexible packaging questions coming up, which is perfect because that is the content on our next slide. So, well, what about all the other various plastic things that we're seeing show up in our streams? Keith and team, thoughts here?
Yeah, so I think first about the size. Sometimes things can be made of a very recyclable material, but still have difficulty making it through to the recycling end market, and that comes and that just has to do with its size. Think of little pieces have to travel a long way through MRF, and the MRF is designed for to get bigger pieces like bottles through more efficiently. So when we see things like plastic utensils, those don't behave well in a MRF. They either fall out or turn into residue, which means they're thrown away, or they can sometimes get swept up into a paper bale. So, so our advice is plastic utensils are not actively part of a good mix. And when you're communicating with your public about plastic bottles and containers, that hopefully will help reduce some confusion around utensils. Bottle caps, keep those caps on the bottles. That's the best way to make sure that they get to their end market and are reused. Now, the questions that usually come along with bottle caps are, but aren't they made of a different type of plastic? I thought two types of plastics couldn't be recycled together. And the answer is you're absolutely right. But the step one of recycling that plastic bottle is that it gets shred apart. And after it's shredded, it goes through what's called a float sink bath or a float sink wash. And different types of plastics will float and different types of plastics will sink. And so they're able to separate the polypropylene caps from the PET bottles and recycle them separately. And I would say that there's a good market for that material. So the only way to get those caps to their end markets is to make sure they're attached on the container. Laminated pouches, we're seeing more and more pouches in the marketplace, from everything from soups to, I bought a bag of oatmeal over the weekend, and it was my first pouch oatmeal that I had seen. The tricky part with those pouch packagings is that when they're empty, they're flat. And when they're flat, they behave like paper. And so MRFs have to work to make sure that they don't end up in their mixed paper line. There is work going on with pouches. Sometimes they can be multi-layer materials, and we have to be a little bit trickier. But right now, the answer is that pouches do not actively, successfully get recycled in the way that we wish they would, though we are seeing work there. And then finally, poly-coated cups. And when we say that, we mean hot cups, like if you went to your coffee shop and you got a paper cup. There's actually a poly, meaning a plastic liner, on the inside of that cup. And a lot of work in the marketplace has been going on. There's been a lot of work going on in the marketplace to understand if those poly-coated cups can make it to a good market. There's that fiber, meaning that paper is high quality. So we'd like to see it get there, and I think by the end of the year we'll hear some more definitive outcomes from research on yes, no for the poly-coated cup question.
Thank you, Keith. So we have some questions, as you can imagine, related to this. Just first of all, when you talk about size mattering in a MRF, would you say about anything smaller than 2 inches gets a little tricky?
Ben and Mike, does that sound right?
Yeah, that's the rule of thumb that we provide. Anything smaller than 2 inches will fall through the system. It's not exact, but using that as a rule of thumb is certainly what we do with the municipalities we work with.
Okay. Yeah, agreed here.
So question regarding the caps on message. Priscilla typed in and said something that they saw at a Burlington County MRF once is air or liquid being trapped inside of those bottles with the caps and then having the bottles pop out of the side of the final baled material. What's the group's take on that as an issue?
Well, it happens. This has been Pettigo Rumpke Recycling. It sure happens. And, you know, newer MRFs, Karen, with some type of perforation systems can help in that area, as well as maybe stop bottles from rolling, so optical sorting equipment can better recognize the polymer. But yeah, the PET bottle with a cap on with liquid sure wants to stay a PET bottle.
Yeah, and you know, the message is always empty and recycle, empty and replace caps to recycle, because we want that bottle to be the proper weight. When it's getting separated in the single stream MRF, when everything comes in mixed together and then things get separated out, if it's not a manual separation, meaning someone physically picking it, then it is puffs of air that blow that material to the right direction and separate it from the other containers that are in that stream. So we, you know, that's why we want it to be empty in that sense.
So another question related to lids, but so dairy tub lids, yogurt containers, margarine containers, those lids, do they get sorted properly at the MRF? They're small and flat. Is this related to that lids keep your tops on message on containers?
Yeah, so the APR has worked on a bale spec that's specific to include tubs and lids, so that good material. And just last week, Karen and I were talking to KW Plastics about their materials that they accept in their tubs and lids bale, and again, the lids is there. So when the lid is on, it seems to move through more successfully, but that's again with a caps on, lids on conversation. So.
Okay, and then what about Keith mentioning that about PET reclaimers who accept mixed bales of bottles with thermoforms as another outlet?
Yeah, and I'd say two things about the PET bales. Ben talked about this a little bit, but when we talked about getting good density, if there's air in that bottle, can you get a good density in your bale in order to be able to market it? The barrier to keeping caps on for years was that the end recyclers couldn't separate the material and couldn't get good density of bales. But now, as most MRF equipment has produced beefier balers, those end markets are seeing perfectly fine, nice, tight bales and full truckloads. So we know that it's successfully getting to market. There may be communities who are still running smaller bales and have trouble with that caps on message, and that's why we, and they might decide to keep caps off because they just can't get the compression that they need in that material. So first there. Now the second one of PET thermoforms moving through in a PET bale. We do see MRFs marketing bales with a PET thermoform. The question is how much? How much is enough? How much is too much? And I think that's where the work is really going on to see, you know, if there's an 8 or 13% thermoform to bottle or percent thermoforms in a bottle bale. Is that appropriate? The material, the polymer makeup is the same in the two materials. It's the way that they're formed and then, frankly, how thick they are that sometimes makes it harder for those thermoforms. So that's depending on which reclaimer, who is recycling what. There's not quite consistency, but groups are working on that.
And Risa mentioned that there's an FPI map that could maybe help. So if there's folks on the phone here that are interested in learning more about reclaimers who can accept mixed bales, there's some resources available.
Karen, this has been Pettigo. Just real quick, I just wanted to mention that, I think our reclamation rate on PET bottles, HDPE bottles, is somewhere in the neighborhood of 30%. If, we could capture 75%, what a, great world that would be. Just, kind of looking at what can readily go through a MRF and, focusing our efforts, education efforts to get more of the materials that can easily go through the MRF.
Okay, great.
Hey,
and
Karen, real quick, Phil has been trying a number of different ways to get through, and now he's on his cell phone, and he thinks it works. Phil, are you there? Oh, not quite. All right, he and I are working in the background. I'll keep it going.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that, Keith, and thank you for continuing to try, Phil. Okay, so I'm just going to take a couple more questions, and then we need to wrap this one up and keep moving. But just cups, plastic cups came up. That this George, I believe from Madison, says, our big issue is plastic cups. I keep hearing no, except for the PETE cups. Any clarification there?
Oh, plastic cups. When we every year, the Association of Post-Consumer Plastics Recyclers does a survey to see what type of plastics the largest city in each state are taking, whether it's just bottles or bottles and polypropylene or all plastics. And what we see is a steady trend to be able to accept more types of plastic cups. So I think that as we continue to trend towards more types of plastic cups, as time passes, the answer will be increasingly yes. But I'd have to see exactly where you are to be able to answer that directly. So keep asking questions, I think, there.
Okay, great. So we do have more plastic questions, but unfortunately we need to keep moving on. So just so everyone knows, we are going to be developing highlights from these webinars and putting them together and sending them out through our newsletter. So if you're not on our newsletter, you can visit our website, recyclecurbside.org. You can sign up there for our newsletter. But let's...
Karen, this is Mike with Sunoco. Can I just add one last comment?
Please.
One area that we've seen, which is around quality, but also a safety standpoint, is especially with diabetics, they're putting needles, syringes into the plastic bottles, and then it ends up in the recycling area. And we continue to work with our communities to try and help educate. But it really is, again, around the safety of our people that are in the facility with all those needles and syringes that do come out, and then the quality of the material. So that's another area, if others are coming across that can be another communication and education element.
Great. Thank you very much, Mike. That's an important safety point. So moving on to cartons. Are cartons recyclable? Let's see. Is Phil back online here? Okay. No, Phil. Just very briefly, I can go ahead and recap. On our last webinar, Phil said emphatically, yes, cartons are recyclable. There are a number of domestic markets and over 100 international markets. Some markets are able to use the entire carton. Others capture the fiber alone, which is the majority of the carton's makeup. So we're increasingly seeing cartons move into curbside collection programs. And moving on to that, related to this poly-coated cup question, we spoke to that a little bit under the plastics heading, but Mike, if you want to speak to that as well as your experience with plastics and related to kind of the multi-material piece in question too as well.
Yeah, the Carton Council has done a great job of supporting this and really trying to drive recovery by investing in the whole process, whether it's the processing equipment and infrastructure or helping develop the markets for the material at the end of the day. It all becomes very valuable. If you can get poly-coated cups sorted with the cartons, they can be recycled there as well. And then it greatly depends on the process of or the paper mill that's going to end up processing the cartons. The majority of what they're looking for out of the cartons are the fiber or is the fiber component. especially in the white ones where you've got the bleached fiber. That's very good fiber and can be reused again. What's left over after that is typically a blend of polyethylene and aluminum, and there are, in some cases, ability to go ahead and process that again. If there's enough aluminum content, it can be recovered, and then the polyethylene may be used as well. In other cases, it can be used as a fuel for energy, in which case the polyethylene is burned to create heat and energy that could be used at the paper mill or another area, and then the aluminum is collected after the fact. And unfortunately, there are still some locations where after the fiber has been removed, the residue that's left from that process, which again is mostly polyethylene and aluminum with some fiber that didn't get recovered, does end up in the landfill. But again, it varies greatly from one facility to another.
Okay, and a couple questions related to cartons. For sorted recycle bins, so dual stream programs, should cartons go in plastic or paper?
Well, this is Mike with Sunoco again. It again depends on the MRF operator and are they able to separate cartons, and so you'd really have to work with them. It all depends on their process.
Okay. And related to that, lids on cartons, I believe Carton Council says yes. Is that, do you know if that's correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And then another question from Sago related to asking if you can't separate the cartons and cups from other paper, then what's happening there? So if they end up in a mixed paper bale.
Yeah, so this is Mike with Sunoco again. I can't say every single one ends up there, but that is the most likely location for it, just based on the way that most MRFs operate, that those materials will get carried with the other mixed paper and end up there. Very rarely would it go in with any of the plastics. It would ultimately be a mistake if that happened from the air streams for the optical sorters. So the majority of it would end up with mixed paper.
Okay. And then a final carton question before we move on. Are milk cartons from schools very problematic? And I would just lead into that saying that the Carton Council does a lot of great work with their schools to help them empty and recycle. Anything to add from any of our panelists?
This is Ben Pettigo, Rumpke Recycling. That's a great success story. You know, I think that Aseptic Gabletop Cartons, you know, Rumpke worked with the Carton Council on both Cincinnati and Columbus MRFs, received optical sortation equipment, and it's a great story, being able to handle that type of material.
Okay, great. And we just had a comment saying, love pointing out school milk cartons in our bales on school tours. All right, so let's move on to our next, which was another one of those big myths that folks wanted to spend some time on, pizza boxes. Pizza boxes aren't recyclable, right? And Mike, I believe you had this one last go around with Ben a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the cardboard box is recyclable. It's the other stuff that ends up in it that becomes the biggest challenge. We don't want the pizza crusts or the cheese or the little packages of sauce that come in there. That's not going to help the MRF or the paper mills that are going to consume the cardboard boxes in the end. So it's all about cleaning out the container and making sure that it goes into the right stream. In some of the past, we've also had issues with grease and food, and so quite a few of the companies now are putting an extra liner in the box, and that should go in the trash right now. Most often it's got some kind of a grease-resistant coating or infusion in the paper to help that package format work properly. So it's the outside cardboard box that can go into most systems, and as long as it's been emptied, can be very easily recycled.
Karen, I think this comes back to the empty and recycle message, right?
Absolutely. Yep. Eat all your pizza. Take out that little paper liner and recycle your box. Okay, so related to this, there were 2 additional questions. Can you recycle pizza boxes with grease or cheese? Here we have a picture of a pretty standard-looking pizza box once it's empty. How do you communicate this with the public?
This has been Pettigo, Karen. and Mike, I think, can really answer to this. I'm not aware of significant issues with pizza boxes with grease being a major contaminant. I think there have been some pretty sophisticated studies done. I'm thinking maybe Moore and Associates has conducted some studies. Mike, does that sound true?
Yeah, generally by the time it gets through the MRF, it isn't a great issue. Where it can become a problem is if there's food in there, it will go bad while it's in the collection process and ultimately coming through to the MRFs. And once it's in a bale of paper, if there's a whole pizza in there, it could be in that bale for many, many months. And so you can then get into other issues associated with that just from a handling standpoint. Then the other challenge you get is a lot of the mills that are processing material for food products aren't going to want to accept that kind of input into their process. They're going to look for much cleaner sources of recycled fiber coming into the mill, so it may limit your MRF operator in terms of where they can market the material if there is significant contamination. But generally, it's not an issue widespread. It really comes down to being able to communicate with the residents, going back to that empty and recycle mantra that has been repeated several times.
Okay. So we have several questions that have come in, and one question is this message similar or the same for cardboard and other corrugated boxes in terms of, you know, if they're empty, a little bit of grease or things like that aren't going to be super problematic? How does this relate to other types of corrugated boxes? Or we had another question related to like paper cake boxes or paperboard cake boxes. Would they have similar guidelines around food contamination?
This is Mike from Sunoco again. The short answer is yes. Empty and recycle. As long as you've cleaned it out, then it should work through the process very well.
Okay. And then the follow-on question to that related to Chinese mills, and Tad writes in, Chinese mills have specific instructions that pizza boxes are a prohibitive. Any comment on that from the MRF perspective, Phil or Mike?
This has been, Karen, I'm not aware of any of our buyers that have any you know, particular stipulations on pizza boxes. As far as a prohibitive.
I've not come across that. There are limits on prohibitives and outthrows that are in the specifications for the paper, but I've never come across one that's specific to pizza boxes. They may have had experience with a source of cardboard in the past where there was high food contamination, and they may have zeroed in on that, but generally it hasn't been a major issue.
Okay. And so to clarify, the big takeaway from this one is some grease is okay. We just need it to be empty. So as long as all the food is out, take out that little piece of, that little sheet that's in there to provide some protection. Take everything out. You just have your box. Recycle it.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is to keep your message simple to the consumer. Don't worry them about grease, because now you know that the grease is not a worry. As long as it's empty and recycle, the goal is to get your public trusting the material flow. And keeping your message simple around that.
Great. Okay, and so let's move on. And this was a question that came through as well, so I'm glad we're hitting it here. You know, the MRFs, they can do all sorts of things. They can just sort it out. So if it's not recycled at the MRF, it just ends up at the landfill anyway, so no big deal. Just put it in your cart and send it along its way. Mike, I'll start with you. I know that from a safety and efficiency standpoint, this is not the message we want.
That's right, Karen. Those are the two big things, is the safety side of things. When we've got people in there that are handling all of this material, anything extra that gets in the way can cause some issues, whether it's manually sorting the material or impeding the flow of the other material that comes through. And ultimately, the MRF is there to separate the recyclable materials. As you get higher levels of non-recyclable materials or contamination, it impacts the efficiency of that facility and ultimately the cost structure for both the MRF operator and the sources of the material, the municipalities that are relying on that, and will long-term have an overall impact on there.
I think if Phil was on the call, he would want to jump in and say that there's a difference between what the MRF list is and what the public list is. So as a recycling coordinator, you know the ins and outs of the details of what your MRF can and cannot accept. What your job is translating that into a very simple consumer-facing message and keeping that nice and clean, like empty and recycle.
That's right.
Karen, this is Ben Pettigo here, and you know, in our MRFs, the residuals or the contaminants give us a focus on what our message, maybe we're not as clear as we should be in certain aspects of our message. And so you know, we're very sensitive to Mike's point about safety issues, and then you know, what can we do to deliver a better message, you know, more understandable to the public.
Mm-hmm. Right, and I think building on that, Ben, that good point is getting to these audience questions, and something from CVP's perspective related back to developing communications material and really having that good communication with your MRF to make sure that you're in communication with them, finding out what those big problematic materials are from a MRF efficiency standpoint, from a safety standpoint, from a quality of material standpoint, but including those major issues, not providing this laundry list of no's, but finding out those core important issues and emphasizing those so that you really start to drill down and emphasize quality with your residents. Related to that, what are the main problem materials and quality concerns from the MRF perspective?
Well, this has been Pettigo, Karen. I think bulky items, and we see some good visuals here, you know, with the holiday season, Christmas trees, Christmas lights, wood, those types of things. We saw some good photos that CVP put in on screen systems, what can happen to really drastically reduce the efficiencies in a MRF. Sometimes, Karen, when we talk about 30, 40, 50 tons per hour. Sometimes it's really hard for us to get a handle on what that actually means. You know, if you're looking at processing 700 tons a day of material, you know, any type of this contamination can shut a MRF down.
Okay, and any strategies for helping to prevent these problems from that MRF perspective?
This is Mike. I think a big part of it is communication, is working closely with the municipalities so that you can identify, I think Ben mentioned earlier, taking a look at what is in the residue and using that as feedback into the discussion with the municipalities and ultimately the residents. We've also seen random curbside audits as well as being very helpful in providing both positive and corrective communication back to the residents of what's in their bin. Can be very helpful in managing those communications and expectations up front.
Okay. All right, so we're going to move on. We have the energy slide. I think we're all pretty clear here on balance. There's significant energy savings from recycling versus manufacturing items. CVP has some nice slides on that we can include in the highlight recap materials, but we're going to keep going in the interest of time. And so moving on to this bonus myth, and Keith, this is one I want to hand off to you to start with, but this question of what do cities do? They have limited resources. Are they on their own with outreach and education materials?
No, they're not. And I think if Phil was on, he'd say this is that outreach can be a partnership with a MRF. He's pointing out to me that in their work with ReCommunity, their MRF, they take pictures of loads that come in and seeing how the quality looks as it's happening. So I would say no, you're not alone. We're developing new and better resources for you. State offices are there to help. There are other organizations that are trying to make this simpler for you. And through our work with the bins to carts materials and then ongoing tools like oops cards and door hangers that we'll be developing for you to adopt free of charge, we're definitely here to help you.
Okay.
I would point out that as you're working to develop your communication, think about how you engage your drivers. Think about how you engage your route. Is it possible to drive in front of your truck and take a look yourself at some of the containers, especially if you have an automated system? Can you take a peek, look in every 20th bin or something and see how that contamination is going? Can you engage your driver to hop out every 20th household and look in the container? And feel free to leave an oops card or a door hanger to remind the resident about what is and isn't going well. Those automated systems often have cameras so that the drivers can see what's going in. Engage them as being part of the solution so that they become an advocate for your program as well.
And then this is a question I think that we touched on a little bit the last webinar, but this question around private haulers and how to engage with private haulers to address contamination.
Mm-hmm. So Phil's telling me, I'm getting text from him, that they use photos of the materials that come in to their MRF to help go back to understand which routes are having the best success. I think that's similar to what you can do with some of your private contracts of working with your haulers, using photos, driving along with them, driving along behind them to help make sure that just because there's a disconnect by having a private hauler, that you're not having a disconnect of information.
Yeah, and I would add to that, Keith, I live in one of those communities that has subscription-based service, and our community does an outstanding job of good communication with residents, good communication with the haulers, and there's very good flow of information. So again, when talking about communities communicating with their MRFs and making sure that there's good communication up and down that chain, including a private hauler in that communication mix as well is critically important, and making sure that things are done right and that there's certain ways that cities can really put in good structures to make sure that that happens. So relating to our question about are we alone, or you're definitely not alone, just wanted to mention that we have some really exciting things that are happening now and are on the horizon. Keith, would you like to walk us through these?
Yes, on the news tab on our website, we just last week released an RFP for our next round of city partners. This RFP is designed entirely around communities that are in small bins and ready to go to larger roll carts to get more material flowing through. So I encourage you to take a look at that. Around that, if you're not interested in this grant round but you would like some help and technical assistance and education, this cart guide will soon be coming out and will be available to you to help you have the best program possible. One of the additions to our newsletter, if you're not on our newsletter, you will be by joining on this webinar, is the addition of letters from Liz. And in these little articles, Liz Bedard, who is the lead of our technical council, will bring to us some of the highest, kind of the most pressing parts on the technical side of recycling. And CVP doesn't want to be it alone either. By engaging our technical council, we have some of the best and brightest in the industry helping to make sure that we're solving problems the most efficient way. But we're always happy to put questions to them. If you stump us, we'll take it to them. So use us to go as far as you need.
Okay, and so just some also exciting news to share. CVP's recycling partnership has started some work in some initial cities. We see work launching in Columbia, South Carolina, in Richmond, Virginia, in Florence, Alabama, and some social media related to that you can see here as well. So these are just some fun ideas as well as you engage your communities and residents in getting excited about recycling. And then finally, we wanted to offer a quick city spotlight. This was submitted by Johanna Luttrell. She's a recycling program aide with the Village of Ridgewood, New Jersey, and she's participated on some recent CVP as well as EPA Sustainable Materials Management webinars, and sent us some before and after pieces that she did based on some of the information that she's gained from these various outreach efforts. And so here is the example of her before, as we see lots of words on here. and then after. And we were so excited at the huge improvements that she made in these materials and thought that the city or the village just did an outstanding job with recrafting these. And so we wanted to share, if your community is similar and you're looking to really reboot and re-energize around your education and outreach materials, you absolutely can do that, and we're happy to help as well. And so finally, just wanted to add, thank you for attending. We have a wealth of information that's available through our resources, recyclecurbside.org/news. I'll be participating on a webinar this Thursday with EPA's Sustainable Materials Management. We'll be talking a little bit more about education and outreach resources. I want to thank our panelists who have given up their time and energy to really help provide some information. And for those of you who asked questions and didn't get those answered, fear not. We'll be taking the information from both of these webinars. Elizabeth Schuessler, our communications director, will be identifying the highlights and bits and pieces that we weren't able to address and consolidating those into resources that will get pushed out over the next couple of months through our newsletter. And so look for those in your inbox. But as always, thank you so much for participating, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.